You did not find this by accident. You felt pulled here because something inside you has been shifting. You have been sensing it, a quiet strength rising where pain used to live. Listen carefully. You are not ordinary. You never have been. You have walked through fire that should have destroyed you. You have endured battles no one saw. You have carried wounds in silence while the world misjudged your quiet. And yet you are still here, breathing, standing, awakening. Have you noticed it? The triggers do not hit the same anymore. The memories do not shake you the way they once did. The names, the betrayals, the humiliation, they no longer control your nervous system. Something changed, and not everyone will understand this. Only the chosen recognize this shift. There are 9 indicators your past scars have become the keys to your dominion. Not coping mechanisms, not survival tactics. Dominion, authority, spiritual leverage. The enemy thought your wounds would mark you with weakness, but heaven marked you with anointing, and today you will see it clearly. If this resonates, if you feel the confirmation already rising in your spirit, stand in agreement. Subscribe, a line. Because this message is not for spectators, it is for the set apart. First, what tried to break you now answers to you. You remember when it controlled you, the rejection, the betrayal, the abandonment. It used to hijack your emotions. It used to dictate your reactions. It used to pull you into spirals. You hated that feeling. You asked yourself, why am I like this? But you were not weak, you were wounded. And wounds, when surrendered, become weapons. Look at yourself now. The same situations that once triggered you now sharpen you. The same type of person that once manipulated you can no longer access you. You see patterns faster. You discern motives quicker. You respond. You do not react. That is dominion. Do you understand what happened? The battlefield that once owned you became your training ground. Darkness attacked you repeatedly, not because you were fragile, but because you were dangerous. The enemy studies potential, and you carried it. Every tear strengthened your perception. Every betrayal refined your boundaries. Every lonely night built your internal throne. You are not triggered the same way anymore, because you are not the same person anymore. The scar that once throbbed with pain now pulses with authority. Psychologically, you integrated the wound. Spiritually, you conquered the territory. That memory, it no longer imprisons you. It reports to you. This is the shift. You walk into rooms differently now. You hold eye contact differently. You sense manipulation before it forms. You feel spiritual warfare before it manifests. That is not hypervigilance. That is refined discernment. What once destabilized you now stabilizes you. And this is only the first indicator. If this has happened in your life, you are not healing randomly. You are ascending strategically. Stand firm in this realization. Your scars are no longer open wounds. They are keys. Keys to territory. Keys to influence. Keys to dominion. And if this is the first confirmation, second, your sensitivity was never weakness. It was refinement. You felt everything. The tension in rooms, the shift in tone, the unspoken resentment behind polite smiles. And they told you that you were too much, too emotional, too intense, too aware. Have you heard that before? They tried to convince you that your depth was dysfunction, but you were not fragile. You were discerning. There is a difference. The world numbs itself to survive. You were wired to perceive. That difference isolated you. You walked into spaces and immediately sensed what others ignored. You felt danger before it appeared. You sensed betrayal before it unfolded. And instead of honoring it, you questioned yourself. You shrank. You silenced your intuition. You tried to become ordinary, but you could not, because you are not. Listen carefully. What people criticized in you was prophetic perception forming under pressure. Darkness reacts to awareness. The enemy prefers blindness, but you were never blind. Your scars sharpened your sight. Every betrayal heightened your instincts. Every disappointment tuned your spirit. Every season of confusion forced you to study energy motive pattern. Now you read atmospheres like maps. You walk into a room and know who carries peace and who carries warfare. You sense manipulation before the words are spoken. You detect deception before it takes form. That is not anxiety, that is strategy. Do you see it? The same sensitivity that once overwhelmed you now empowers you. You no longer drown in what you feel. You interpret it. You navigate it. You command it. Light within you exposes darkness around you. And not everyone will understand this. Only the chosen recognize this shift. They may still call you intense. They may still label you different. But difference is the mark of dominion. Ordinary people move unaware. You move informed. Ordinary people react after damage is done. You sense shifts before impact. That is favor wrapped in refinement. That is anointing forged through pain. Your scars did not make you unstable. They calibrated your spiritual radar. Now when something feels off, you trust it. You no longer gaslight yourself to maintain comfort. You honor the signal. You respond with clarity. This is elevation. You are no longer surviving emotional storms. You are forecasting them. You are no longer shocked by betrayal. You see it forming at a distance, and that awareness is power. Power the enemy cannot easily outmaneuver. Power that shifts rooms before you speak. Power that intimidates the unaware. Stand firm in this. Your depth is divine. Your awareness is assignment. Your perception is preparation for territory larger than you imagine. Because leaders must see what others cannot. Guardians must detect what others dismiss. Rulers must sense what others overlook. And you are being shaped for rulership. This is only the second indicator. And if your perception has sharpened instead of shattered you, third, isolation did not weaken you. It crowned you. You remember the silence, the unanswered messages, the rooms where your name was no longer mentioned, the seasons when support vanished without explanation. It felt like abandonment. It felt like exile. You asked yourself, did I do something wrong? But listen carefully. When they withdrew their applause, heaven increased your resilience. When they stepped back, God stepped closer. Isolation was not rejection. It was separation for preparation. The world depends on validation to function. You were trained to move without it. That is not common. That is not ordinary. That is chosen. You learned how to act without clapping hands behind you. You learned how to build without cheering voices around you. You learned how to believe when no one affirmed you. That is strength most people never develop. Have you noticed you no longer crave recognition the same way? You no longer shrink when attention disappears. You no longer panic when you stand alone. Why? Because silence built your inner throne. In the quiet, you met yourself. In the quiet, you confronted insecurity. You wrestled doubt. You dismantled dependency. And you survived it. Darkness thought isolation would make you fragile, but it made you formidable. The enemy isolates to intimidate. God isolates to initiate. Do you see the difference? While others fear being alone, you have mastered it. You can sit in silence without unraveling. You can walk alone without collapsing. You can stand without applause and still feel anchored. That is dominion forming. When you no longer need permission to occupy space, you become dangerous to systems built on approval. You do not wait to be invited anymore. You do not beg to be included. You enter where you are called. And if doors close, you build. Isolation stripped away performance. It stripped away image maintenance. It stripped away people-pleasing. What remains is you, unfiltered, unapologetic, unmovable. Not everyone will understand this shift. They still need validation to feel secure. You have been trained beyond that. You are not fueled by applause. You are fueled by assignment. You are not sustained by attention. You are sustained by anointing. That is a different level of existence. Isolation did not sideline you. It stabilized you. It forced you to develop internal approval. It forced you to anchor your identity in destiny, not popularity. Now, when you walk into rooms, you do not look for affirmation. You carry presence. You carry weight, you carry quiet authority, and people feel it. Because a person who can stand alone cannot be easily manipulated. A person who does not need applause cannot be controlled. A person who survives silence cannot be silenced. You are no longer afraid of being unseen. You know who sees you. You know who called you. You know who appointed you. Stand firm in that. Isolation was not your punishment. It was your construction phase. And if you can stand without applause, fourth, Betrayal did not surprise heaven. It revealed you. You were wounded by those closest to you, not strangers, not distant critics, trusted voices, familiar hands, people who knew your story and still chose to fracture it. That cut deeper. It shook your foundation. It made you question your judgment. Was I blind? Did I miss the signs? Listen carefully. It was not random. Darkness does not attack surface connections. It targets covenant. The enemy strikes where trust lives, because trust is sacred, and when it breaks, something shifts forever. You felt that shift. It hardened you for a moment. It made you cautious. It made you quieter, but it also awakened you. Trust was broken so wisdom could be born. Pain cracked your naivety. Disappointment sharpened your discernment. You no longer measure people by words. You measure them by patterns. You no longer fall for charm. You study consistency. That is elevation. Before betrayal, you led with heart alone. After betrayal, you lead with spirit and sight. There is a difference. Have you noticed you can now sense when someone's energy does not align with their language? You can feel when flattery masks envy. You can detect when loyalty is conditional. That is not paranoia. That is calibration. Darkness tried to make you bitter. Heaven made you precise. You do not close your heart. You guard your gates. You do not refuse connection. You refine alignment. That is dominion forming. The world calls it trust issues, but you know better. You carry discernment forged through fire. You do not attach quickly anymore. You observe, you listen, you wait, and when you move intentionally, because you understand something now. Not everyone who smiles is sent. Not everyone who supports is a sign. Some are distractions, some are lessons, and some are warfare in disguise. You learned the hard way, but you learned. That is the difference. Betrayal stripped away illusion. It forced you to see people as they are, not as you hoped them to be. Hope without wisdom is vulnerability. Wisdom with compassion is power. You carry both now. And that makes you dangerous to deception. The enemy cannot infiltrate you the same way, because you see beyond performance. You see motives. You see consistency. You see integrity. And once you see it, you do not ignore it. Stand firm in this. You were not betrayed because you are foolish. You were betrayed because you are marked. Chosen ones are tested in trust, because you will one day steward greater influence, greater territory, greater responsibility. And discernment must be developed before dominion is given. You now choose alignment with precision, not emotion. You choose partners by character, not chemistry. You choose alliances by spirit, not excitement. That is maturity. That is authority. That is transformation. Betrayal did not end you. It activated you. And if your sight has sharpened through heartbreak, fifth, your weakest season became your authority. Read that again in your spirit. The very chapter you wanted erased became the chapter that crowned you. You remember the humiliation, the exposure, the failure, the season when everything seemed to collapse at once. You felt small. You felt seen in the worst way. You wondered if that moment disqualified you. But listen, it did not disqualify you. It marked you. The place of humiliation became the place of revelation, when everything stripped away your image, your strength, your pride. You met truth. You met your limits. You met your dependency on God. And that encounter changed you. Have you noticed you no longer speak like someone who read about pain? You speak like someone who survived it. Your voice carries weight now, not volume, weight. When you speak about betrayal, people listen. When you speak about endurance, people lean in. When you speak about healing, something shifts in the atmosphere. Why? Because pain carved credibility into your voice. You are not theoretical. You are tested. The world is full of advice, but you carry authority. Authority is not given by comfort. It is forged in crisis. That weakest season you despised, it stripped you of performance. It forced you to confront insecurity. It pushed you into prayer. It drove you into silence. It broke you open. And in that breaking, something ancient awakened. You discovered that you could survive what tried to crush you. You discovered that you could endure without applause. You discovered that even at your lowest, you were still chosen. That realization changed your posture. You do not speak from ego, you speak from scars. And scars preach louder than pride ever could. What embarrassed you now empowers others. The story you once hid now liberates someone else. The struggle you tried to bury now becomes someone's breakthrough. Darkness thought exposure would silence you, but it amplified you, because authenticity is power. You are no longer afraid of your history. You are no longer ashamed of your process. You stand in it. You own it. You steward it. That is dominion forming. The enemy attacks potential with humiliation, but heaven transforms humiliation into revelation. You now understand pain at a depth most avoid, and that depth is magnetic. People feel safe around someone who has been broken and rebuilt. They trust someone who has fallen and risen. They follow someone who has scars and still stands. You are not just surviving, you are carrying something. Something earned, something refined, something dangerous to darkness. Your weakest season did not weaken your destiny, it authorized it. Stand in that awareness. Feel the shift. You are not recovering. You are rising with evidence. And if your pain has become your platform, sixth, the warfare increased because your influence expanded. You felt it. The sudden resistance, the unexpected attacks, the strange opposition that seemed to rise out of nowhere. You asked yourself, why now? Why when you are growing? Why when you are healing? Why when you are finally stepping into clarity? Understand this. Resistance intensified because your territory expanded. Darkness does not waste resources on the stagnant. The enemy does not monitor the inactive. Opposition began tracking your growth because your growth became a threat. You thought the pressure meant you were off track, but the pressure is proof you are advancing. Have you noticed every time you level up, something tries to distract you? Every time you gain momentum, something attempts to discourage you. Every time you step into confidence, something whispers doubt. That is not coincidence. That is reaction. Darkness reacts when dominion rises. When you were uncertain, warfare was lighter. When you were shrinking, opposition was subtle. But now you stand differently. Now you speak differently. Now you carry presence. And hell noticed. Do not panic. Promotion attracts pressure. Favor provokes friction. Light invites resistance. You are not being attacked because you are weak. You are being attacked because you are positioned. The enemy tests gates before they open. And you are a gate to influence, a gate to leadership, a gate to territories that require strength. Pressure proves proximity. The closer you move toward assignment, the louder warfare becomes. But listen carefully. Noise is not defeat. Noise is intimidation. And intimidation only works if you retreat. Stand firm. Do not interpret resistance as rejection. Interpret it as recognition. The spirit realm recognizes rank before people do. Opposition sensed your expansion before applause ever will. That is why warfare increased in private. That is why battles intensified behind the scenes. Your growth did not go unnoticed, and that is confirmation. You are not invisible. You are influential. You are not overlooked. You are observed. Darkness does not chase ordinary people. It attempts to delay those marked for dominion. Feel that truth settle in you. The pressure you feel is not random stress. It is stretching. It is capacity building. It is preparation for weight you are about to carry. Because greater territory requires thicker skin. Greater authority requires deeper endurance. Greater favor requires fortified character. You are being strengthened under strain, not crushed, strengthened. The world sees chaos. Heaven sees calibration. Do not shrink now. Do not question your path now. The warfare confirms you are near something significant, near expansion, near elevation, near breakthrough. The enemy is loud when he is nervous, and he is nervous because you did not fold, you did not quit, you did not retreat, you rose. And now the pressure proves promotion is near. If warfare has increased around you, seventh, your emotional mastery intimidates the unhealed. You see it now. The way people react when you do not react. The way they escalate when you remain steady. The way they grow louder when you grow quieter. Have you noticed you do not chase closure anymore? You create it. You do not beg for explanations. You decide when something is finished. That shift unsettles those who once controlled your emotions. There was a time when your silence meant hurt. Now your silence means strength. There was a time when conflict pulled you into chaos. Now chaos exhausts itself trying to pull you. But you do not move, you do not regress, you do not spiral. That is not suppression, that is mastery. Darkness feeds on reaction, immaturity feeds on drama. But you no longer supply either. You feel the emotion, you acknowledge it, and then you govern it. That is dominion within. And inner dominion terrifies unstable spirits. Because when someone cannot provoke you, they cannot manipulate you. When someone cannot trigger you, they cannot steer you. The version of you they once controlled no longer exists. Let that settle. They remember the old you, the reactive you, the over-explaining you, the emotionally tangled you. But that person has evolved, refined, strengthened. You respond from clarity now. You pause before speaking. You choose your energy carefully. You do not argue to be understood. You state truth and stand firm. Have you felt the difference? Arguments dissolve around you. Tension exposes itself. People reveal their instability simply by how they respond to your calm. Your peace is not passive, it is powerful. It exposes imbalance. It exposes insecurity. It exposes hidden agendas. And not everyone can handle that. Some will call you cold. Some will call you distant. But you know better. You are not cold. You are centered. You are not distant. You are disciplined. Emotional mastery is not about numbness. It is about sovereignty. You own your responses. You own your reactions. You own your internal climate. And when you own your internal climate, external storms lose authority. That is why chaos cannot bait you into regression. It tries, it whispers, it provokes. But you see through it because you have already conquered yourself. And conquering yourself is the highest level of warfare. The enemy once exploited your wounds. Now he finds no entry point. That frustrates darkness. That intimidates immaturity. That unsettles those who depended on your emotional volatility. But you are no longer volatile. You are stable, rooted, grounded. That stability is not accidental. It was forged through every scar you carry. Stand in that awareness. You are not easily shaken. You are not easily manipulated. You are not easily erased. You carry something unmovable now. And if your calm unsettles the unhealed. Eighth, those who once overlooked you now seek your insight. You see it, the subtle shift. The same voices that dismissed you now watch you carefully. The same people who underestimated you now study your moves. They may not say it openly, but you feel it. Energy does not lie. There was a time when your words were ignored, when your warnings were brushed aside, when your ideas were minimized. You were the overlooked one, the underestimated one, the one they thought would stay small. But something changed, not in them, in you. Your scars became your credentials. Your silence became strategy. Your growth became undeniable. Have you noticed how they ask different questions now? How they seek your perspective? How they pause when you speak? That is not random. Influence is quietly shifting in your favor. You did not beg for attention. You did not force recognition. You refined yourself in private. And now public perception is adjusting. Darkness tried to bury your voice. Heaven amplified your presence. The overlooked one has become the reference point. They watch how you respond. They observe how you move. They analyze how you remain steady under pressure. Because what they once mocked, they now need. This is how dominion manifests. First comes isolation, then refinement, then resistance, then recognition. But recognition does not inflate you. It confirms you. You are not surprised by the shift. You expected it. Because growth cannot stay hidden forever. Light cannot be suppressed indefinitely. Favor rises even in silence. You were never invisible. You were incubating. Now the room adjusts when you enter. Conversations pivot when you speak. Decisions shift when you advise. That is authority emerging. Not loud, not arrogant, but undeniable. The world respects results, and your endurance produced results. Your scars proved resilience. Your consistency proved discipline. Your calm proved leadership. People are drawn to strength that has been tested, and you have been tested repeatedly. That is why they listen now. That is why they observe now. That is why they seek insight now. You are no longer overlooked, you are consulted, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it. Darkness cannot discredit what heaven has validated. Feel that shift. Stand in it. Do not shrink when recognition comes. Do not minimize your growth. Do not downplay your evolution. You were overlooked on purpose, so your rise would be unmistakable. And if influence is quietly shifting in your favor, ninth, the wound they gave you became the throne you sit on. Let that settle. The very attack designed to disqualify you positioned you for dominion. They thought it would end you. They thought it would stain your name. They thought it would weaken your spirit, but it awakened your rank. You remember the moment when it felt like everything collapsed, when it felt like the ground opened beneath you, when it felt like you were buried under misunderstanding, betrayal, loss. You thought you were being lowered, but you were being planted. What tried to bury you has become the ground from which you rule. Do you see it now? The pain that once silenced you now strengthens your voice. The rejection that once isolated you now defines your authority. The humiliation that once broke you now built you. That wound, it became your throne. Because authority forged in fire cannot be imitated. It cannot be copied. It cannot be stolen. You carry something inherited through endurance. Not comfort, not privilege, fire. Your history of pain is now spiritual leverage. When darkness confronts you, you do not tremble. You remember what you survived. When opposition rises, you do not fold. You remember what tried to erase you and failed. You are not standing because it was easy. You are standing because you endured. And endurance creates dominion. The enemy miscalculated you. He thought pressure would crush you. He thought betrayal would harden you into bitterness. He thought exposure would silence your calling. But heaven used every strike as reinforcement. Every blow strengthened your structure. Every loss increased your resilience. You are not sitting in weakness. You are seated in earned authority. And darkness knows it. That is why warfare intensified. That is why resistance tracked you. That is why attacks felt strategic. Because you were never random. You were rising. Feel this. You are not recovering anymore. You are reigning, not arrogantly, not loudly, but firmly, internally, spiritually, unshakably. The wound became the throne because it forced you to meet your real strength. It stripped illusion. It stripped dependency. It stripped fear. And what remained was power. Stand in that. Own it. Accept it. You are not what happened to you. You are who survived it. You are who transformed it. You are who now governs because of it. You are chosen, not accidentally, not emotionally, strategically, marked before the battle, protected in the fire, promoted through the pressure. Everything that hurt you trained you. Everything that opposed you strengthened you. Everything that tried to bear you elevated you. Comment 9 if you feel this truth in your spirit. Seal it. Acknowledge it. Subscribe if you know you are not ordinary. Because this is not content. This is confirmation. You were never meant to be hidden. You were never meant to be defeated. You were never meant to be average. You were chosen. And what formed against you did not destroy you. It enthroned you.